All right. We're moving to the first slide, and I'm just turning on my webcam. So it's always scary to see yourself on webcam, so I'm trying not to look at myself, but I've been given some good feedback to look into the camera, so I'm going to do my best today. So our session this morning, as you know, is person-centered planning. And one definition of person-centered planning, we'll come back to it, is promoting partnerships to create service plans and maintaining rigorous standards for planning and documentation. And that comes from Tondora 2014. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the session, I'd just like to do a little bit of an overview of our session goals. And just to let you know that these two upcoming, this session and the next session, are really designed for entry-level competency, and that's as a result of feedback that we got from you. So people had said we just want some good entry-level, solid, beginning, skill-based webinars, so that's what we're responding to at the moment. This session, as noted, is about person-centered care, and the next one on July 24th at 10:30 in the morning, we'll talk about strengths-based assessment. So we hope you find this series informative, and we thank you for setting aside the time to be here. And as always, we look forward to your feedback, because that's how best we learn how to meet your needs. An evaluation of today's session will come to you via email along with a certificate of participation. A voluntary self-assessment of the content material of today's session will be available on the Psy Rehab website, as Matt mentioned earlier. So please have a little look around that website and you'll find something. I've put the answer key on the bottom of the page should you need to have those answers, but just to give you a sense of, give yourself a sense of your learning for this session. It will be there for you. We planned the session to be pretty interactive, so I will do my best to respond to your thoughts in the moment. And really, please know that we've designed the session in that way to really generate some feedback and to promote engagement. So I'll just go through session goals, and then I'll just tell you about 2 links that we have put up for your review. So session goals for today are to describe person-centered planning and how this approach differs from traditional approaches to care. To describe best practice regarding person-centered planning, in particular about how strength-based assessment contributes to the development of a person-centered plan. We'll touch on that today, and obviously we'll do that in more detail on the July 24th session. To identify how documentation, goals, objectives, and interventions contribute to PCP. So we'll certainly focus on that quite a bit. Identify some challenges, and I'm sure you'll help me with that in terms of how to integrate PCP in daily work. And then identify how this webinar may influence your own practices. The reason for doing that is we really want to try and make these sessions applicable to your work and useful to you. So we're just going to spend a few moments at the end of the session thinking about how can this material maybe influence your practice. Perhaps many of you are doing it already, but maybe there's a way that we can, as a group, just think about what might be priorities for you individually. So that being said, I do notice that we have a number of people from our PSR graduate program at Douglas College, and I just want to make a shout out to those good people who are clearly continuing their learning. And I see a lot of familiar names on the list, so really nice to see some return people and some people from different parts of our lives. So really nice to have you here. Thank you. Yeah. Hello, Susan. And I see James, and I see Elsa, and I see a number of people. So great to see you all. All right. So with Matthew's help, what I'm going to do is share 2 links with you today. And we hope these will be useful for you as you're thinking about person-centered planning. The reason that we can't give you the full document, is in truth because of copyright law. So we're giving you the links, and then we're asking you to maybe just go seek them out yourself. So Matthew, with your help, if you can please just help us have a little bit of a look at these documents. So as mentioned, the whole things, because I think I'm in violation of copyright law. But Matthew, over to you.
Maybe you can just let folks know where you got these documents and what they're about.
Sure. So these documents both come from Tandora and their colleagues from Yale University. I found them extremely helpful, and I'll refer them to them a little bit during the presentation. One of them is an introduction to documentation. So today we're going to talk about the documentation process and how person-centered care, sometimes it falls down in the documentation process, and I think we have a lot of literature to say that sometimes we have good conversations with people in terms of the planning process, but often the outcome, the way in which those plans look, vary significantly by the time they get on paper. So this, Matthew's cleverly pulled up that first of those two documents, but just to show you a little bit, I think it's about a 12-page document, but it really goes through the documentation process. We'll talk about these 4 areas: philosophy, process, plan, and product during the presentation. It talks a little bit about that, and just at the end, I really like the visual that it provides in terms of I'm going to scoot through this, sorry to do that so fast, but just at the very end of the document, it gives us a nice visual of how the plan can look when it's in place. Okay. There we go. So just in terms of goal, looking at strengths, resources, barriers, objectives, and intervention. So it just helps us nicely pull that together. Now, I'm not going to spend too long time on this because we are going to come back on it, and we have a little bit of a case study that we're going to help us apply some of this information. So the second one is getting into the driver's seat, and just as Matthew's pulling that document up, this is a rather, I would say, a great toolkit for people receiving services. Again, it comes from Tandora and their group from Yale University, and it's just a nice little step-by-step visual and structured toolkit to help people think about how they get involved. So hopefully you can see that on your screen at this point. I believe this is a 2009 document. You'll see Miller Guy Lanseri, if I'm saying that correctly. But it's a nice little thing that you could provide to people receiving services around how to talk to your doctor, how to think about the planning process. It also talks a lot about sharing rights with people, their rights, how they want the meetings to happen, who they want involved in meetings. So it's a pretty comprehensive look at also people's support network, asking people to complete that themselves. Of course, you know, people probably do this in their practice anyway, but it's just kind of pulls all this together, a different way to look at friendships and supports. Things about employment. This section is really helping people set goals around employment or different areas around employment, learning, finances, lifestyle, spirituality, relationships, etc. So I'll just leave these 2 documents with you, and we'll go back to the presentation, but just wanted to give you a very brief orientation to those documents that can be good guides for you.
And then I just want to just let folks know that while we can't share the direct documents themselves, we can share the links. And the links are available for anyone who's interested. The links are available on the first page here, so you're going to see other resources, the Tandora no-date paper on documentation, as well as the second Tandora paper and the 2009 toolkit paper. But more importantly, the links will be available through the website. So after this session at any time, should you want to gain access to these documents, just visit www.psyrehab, P-S-Y-rehab as you see, .ca, and you're going to find under the resources links page the links to these documents for your own usage.
Thanks, Matt. So we'll just get back up and running again. And use Matt. Tell me to use the webcam. So here we go again. All right. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for that. Yeah, and the screen is going to come back to us in a moment. So if you can't see it, don't have a panic because it's going to come back to us with Matt. Could help. The next slide is really just an acknowledgement that as I was pulling this information together, several of you helped me think about this topic, and also I drew heavily from the 2 handouts that I've mentioned, and also this 2004 publication and the Tandora, that's the same one, Getting in the Driver's Seat. At the end of the presentation, I also have some resources as well. So, time to make you work, good people. I would like to ask you what you think about a person-centered planning. So for you, how do you begin to define it? So I'm going to ask you please to just type in the typing box, and we'll spend 30, 40 seconds or so just asking for your what you think person-centered planning is. So here we're just moving toward a definition of person-centered planning. I'm just going to look at the chat and see what people are saying. Yep, so daisies. Oh, Lordy, I'm giving away my answers here. Oh, dearie. So just waiting for some chats to come in. It says multiple attendees are typing. So I'm just going to wait for that. All right, focusing on the client's needs. Awesome, Mona, thank you. Dialoguing with the client to focus on their perception of needs, wants, etc. Focused on what clients want. James says empowering the client. Ooh, Lordy, sometimes it goes too fast for me. Sorry, James. Lots of chat here. Plan that's primarily centered, directed by the client. Really good. Good delineation there. Client the expert knows best. Person leads their life. Plan that's real world. Client, okay. Client-orientated, planning around the client, strengths, needs, expectations, excellent. Plan coming from the client. So here I see a common thread of very much the client's perspective is important, ranging from client involvement to client direction. I also see real world focus. I see a focus on strengths, partnership, helping the client to develop, realize their own goals. Awesome, Susan. Exploration of the client's perception and meaning. Awesome, Mary. Focus on strength, individualized, super. Individualized, client-directed. Awesome, Sandy. So let me share with you what I have, and I'll keep just looking at your comments. Plan customized to clients' needs, interests, strengths, and aspirations. Awesome. Beautifully said, Elsa. So really, I'm just going to move to my definition, which I think everybody's already said it, but involves an ongoing collaborative process of change regarding roles and relationships and outcomes. Changes such as documentation, change based on self-determination, community inclusion, and strength-based individualized service delivery. So you guys got that whole thing. It's really about helping that client be in the driver's seat, created through partnership and shared discovery. So somebody had mentioned helping the client identify their own needs, and an ongoing collaboration between person receiving services, supports, and practitioners. Results in the development, implementation, and unique recovery plan that is updated, importantly, as necessary. Consistent with the values of PSR, promotion of self-determination, community inclusion, and strength-based individualized service delivery, allows for a systems transformation. So not only is it about that individual, it also relates to that, rather than treatment planning, Stephen. Excellent. So if we go back also to Tandora's 2009 document that we showed earlier, she talks about the 4 Ps, which are philosophy. So having that philosophy of client involvement and client participation in place, a process that really engages the client in identifying needs, goals, wishes, supports, and measures of success. The plan that looks like the client is involved. So some of that language, or a lot of that language, is in client's own voice, as opposed to, say, an occupational therapy framework or a social work framework, but in that client's own voice. And then the product, somebody had mentioned earlier on about it being a real-world intervention. So there are 2 kind of definitions, or 2 ways to look at person-centered planning that I think are very helpful. So as mentioned, the philosophy, people have a right to maximum self-determination, irrespective of disability. Pandora says that the process is engaging respectfully and hopefully for the future with people at all stages of the plan. Translating the philosophy and the processes into the quality plan is important. And then the product really relies on having high expectations for outcomes across the life domains. Pandora advises that this is often where people delivering services, it's hard to make that happen in a client-centered way. So often we rely on an organizational focus, omitting the PCP philosophies and processes. So please help me understand, why is PCP important? So from your perspective, why do you think PCP is important? So I'm just, again, going to ask you to type in the box, and I'm going to just wait a moment or 2 to hear from you. I see people are typing. Quality of care, excellent. Quality of life. To provide the best possible care. James, best outcomes for client, absolutely. Greatest success. Client is more invested in the plan and believes in it. Excellent, Megan. We're all unique. People repeat. Please repeat the question. So the question is, why is PCP important? Client-centered, individual needs of clients, ensuring the client's needs are met. Yep. Empowers the client, respect dignity. It's a client life after all. Lisa says the person must be able to contribute in order to feel part of the plan because everybody's different. Increase buy-in. Client is the expert on their own life. Validation. Gives the client autonomy. Prevents disability from being a focus rather than learning to manage with a disability. Sharon, that's an awesome answer. Thank you. Increase their involvement in their own recovery. Better outcomes. Give the client more power over their treatment. So the issue of power is essential. Higher self-esteem. Success in needs based on clients' perceptions. Absolutely, Tracy. Good point. Goal is to empower the person. An individual can be in control of their care and take ownership of the program. Motivation and enablement, Michael. Nice to see you. Beautiful. Thank you. Making the client making their own choices, Leo. Thank you. Maximizes connection, which I believe facilitates healing and well-being. So I'm just going to stop there and I'm going to share with you. So please continue to, because as people can read your feedback as well, so continue to keep typing. If we're missing something, please. Higher self-efficacy, that's important. So what does the literature say? The literature, according to Adams, indicates that collaborative shared decision-making and productive interactions between patients, consumers, and providers is the path to improve wellness outcomes. A treatment plan is a written record of that shared decisional interactive process. However, as Tandora has said already, there is much evidence to suggest that this process is not person-centered, then it will not succeed in yielding optimal results. Treatment planning as a strategy for promoting person-centered care. So I think what we're saying to ourselves is that it's not just about being nice. It means better outcomes. It means that we struggle with it, but that as we consider the treatment planning process as a change opportunity in itself, to engage people as the feedback has said, to promote a sense of efficacy, to promote a sense of being able to evaluate if these outcomes are indeed the outcomes that people want. We truly know from the literature often that as people receiving services and people delivering services, that our goals are often different. And so person-centered planning, the aim is really to align that process of ensuring that people receiving services and delivering services are really on the same page. Simple that it might sound, often that is not the case, and that is what the literature says. So, good work. Thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it. I acknowledge that it was so fast that I'd missed some feedback, but I really thank you for your feedback and your participation. Appreciate it. All right. So the next question we have is, how is PCP different than intervention as usual? So again, I'm going to ask you please to type your answers. Person in recovery, with all support system, excellent. Family, when the person needs help to reach their goal. Thank you, Sharon, for that reminder. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and we will talk about that support mechanism in just a little bit later in this presentation. Thank you. So Kate suggests that PCP is different because the client is in control. Strength-based, individualized. Thank you. Absolutely. So it is somewhat different in that way. In the old days, it was the team who might decide, without the client's presence, what the goals and objectives might be. Client involved in decisions, working together in the recovery process, Leo says. Good. Client is expert rather than helper. And the helper is a resource, Megan. Thank you. Beautifully said. Marianne says, intervention is done to a person. PCP is the person doing the work. Treatment of PCP is the person helps the individual help themselves. Thank you, Sharon. Strong answer there. Thank you. I'll just give that another second. Focuses on positive rather than negative. Goals are determined primarily by the client. The focus is on, Less pathologizing. Thank you, Melanie. Absolutely. Bring relevancy to the individual's context. Good. Absolutely. Resident is involved and had choices. Susanna. Absolutely. All right. So please continue to type should you wish. I'll do my best to keep an eye on there, and I'll just share what I have prepared for you. So the assessment, intervention, and documentation are based on principles of self-determination, community inclusion, and strength-based individual service delivery. So you and I both know that that is a very different focus than the old days, where people would wait to hear what their goals were. They would they would be marginally participatory, and it was very much a top-down. People delivering services knew best. And as mentioned earlier, in terms of family or loved one involvement, that was people were less involved as well. Okay, so just to catch up, everybody has different needs and quality of life. Display respect and validation for the client, so very important. Collaboration versus direction or dictation, often, absolutely. Client is involved fully in decision making. Thank you for that. So my sense is that you have a good sense that person-centered planning is quite different in terms of treatment as usual. What I think we have to do sometimes is really ask ourselves in our own practice, how do you know that you are providing choice? How do you know yourself that people are involved as much as they can within the treatment intervention? Do we share notes with people? Do we ask people to sign their notes? Do we ask for people for feedback in terms of, are you the right person to do this intervention with them? Is this what they need? Do we provide people information on rights and responsibilities? And are we involving family, loved one? How do we think about community inclusion? And how do we think about strength-based individual service delivery? So I guess this slide really is sort of challenging us to think about, as a manager or as somebody who's directly delivering services, how are we demonstrating those values? Because to have those values are extremely good, but how are we actually able to consider the intervention with people, and how can we ourselves know that we're on the right track? So that is sort of an open-ended question for us, but I think that's the work for us as we move forward. So a little bit of a challenge for us, I think. All good to talk about these values and ideas, but how can we demonstrate that we're actually doing them? I think that's our challenge. All right. So I'm going to just shift things a little bit and just let us think about the best practices related to PCP. So I'd like to ask you again to type and to think about what might you think are best practices related to person-centered planning. What do you think they might be? And again, after we do this little bit of a dialogue, I'll share the answers that I have provided, and it's based on work primarily by Tom Dara. So I'm just going to look at the chat box and see what people are saying. Melanie offers motivational interviewing. I can see why you would say that, absolutely, in terms of involving the client and understanding their perspective. Listen more than talk, Stacey. What a wonderful thing that we could all put on our wall, I think. I like Stephen, collaboration versus direction. Thank you, Susanna. Absolutely. Listen and learn. Beautiful, simple. Thank you. Yes. So maybe just looking at our conversation pattern, how much do we talk? How much does the client talk? Good plan. Person has the right to change their mind along the way. Absolutely. We'll talk about that in a moment. Absolutely. I love that comment. Tools for complex system navigation, Melanie. That's good. No right or wrong answers, Michael says. Sharon says, help person to break goals, hopes, manageable steps. Good. Ensuring you're able to provide actual choices to the service user. Fantastic, Matthew. That's very insightful. Ingrid says, allow the client to fail. Yeah, superb, Ingrid. We're going to talk about that. Client involvement, options for care in all aspects, respect for clients. Thank you, Lisa. Kathy, less questioning, remembering the guidelines provided by Carl Rogers. Ooh, I think I'd like to hear more about that, Kathy. That sounds very interesting. Starting involving client from very beginning. Good. Solution-focused language making. Nice. Best practices are yet to be determined. There are no preconceived best practices. Interesting, Stephen. Joanne says, based discussions on client values, supporting the client to recognize and celebrate what they're accomplishing along the way. Kathy, that's fantastic. Leo says, allow the client as much time as they need to make their own decisions concerning the plan. Fantastic, Leo. Sometimes, I think often, we might move faster than working with, so that's important to give people time. Listen to the resident, start with the client, where the client is at. So I'm just going to stop there, continue typing should you wish, and I'm just going to share with you work from Tandora, and I've just added a little, some other information to that. But the first is acknowledge the power of strength-based assessment. And my sense is that in the chat box, you have captured that beautifully. So just acknowledging and we're going to go through these best practices one by one. But acknowledge the power of strength-based assessment, offer individuals maximum participation, choice, control in the planning, implementation, and evaluation. Certainly, Susan says dignity, privacy, independence. You've, I think, captured that. Staff are busy, off on their own to do, people are not moving at the same pace, Leo. I absolutely acknowledge what you're saying. Next, we have number 3, a best practice including natural supports. And we've talked about that already in terms of family or loved one support. Embrace the dignity of risk and the right to fail. So thank you kindly for those of you who've already typed that in, essential. And then guiding philosophies reflected, for example, in the Recovery Declaration, we'll go through that in a moment, by the Ministry of Health, the upcoming PSR service framework, and the upcoming Ministry of Health strategy, which I'll share with you in a moment, and of course, psychosocial rehabilitation principles. So number 5 really helps us understand that person-centered practice is not something off to the side, but it's threaded through contemporary important documents all the way from the Mental Health Commission to the Ministry of Health here in British Columbia to psychosocial rehabilitation principles. So I'm just going to spend a moment to go through most of these best practices from this perspective. One could argue that there are no best practices, but I think in truth this is what's articulated in the literature, and I think it's a really good starting point. That need to begin with that strength-based assessment before goal setting, looking at interests, talents, coping strategies, and I personally would add adding traits and characteristics, previous accomplishments, and supports. Offering individuals maximum participation, consistent with literature about nothing about us without us, understanding possible reluctance and possible desire not to participate in this way, and asking people to reflect on their own progress. For example, of choice of meaning area, for people delivering services to be on time, providing information on rights and responsibilities, and the inclusion of natural supports, developing a pathway for meaningful community life, not just the clinical stability or absence of symptoms, but the inclusion of civic life, such as school, spirituality, places, employment, health, play, enjoying nature, and that the person identifies these strategies in order to decrease paid support. So let's just move, for example, to strength-based assessments. As mentioned, and I know I've said this already, but I'm going to say it again, but that strength-based assessment needs to occur before the goal setting. So I think in my practice, often we would start with perhaps a goal setting meeting. And I think what PCP really helps us understand is let's think about what the person's strengths in their life, what have they got in their life that can be leveraged to meet their goal. I like this quote from Tandora that says the plan is only as good as the assessment, and I think that's a really good centering point. So the assessment would look at interests, talents, coping strategies, strengths, supports, successes. For example, if a person engages in yoga as a wellness strategy, this should be documented alongside the plan that also includes professional supports, professional intervention. So that's a little bit about strength-based. assessment, and please know that we will continue this dialogue in the second presentation on the 24th. So best practice number 2 is maximum participation, choice, and control by ensuring that people receiving services are as involved as they desire in the planning process. So I think this speaks to a little, perhaps, focus on cultural norms and cultural ideas. For example, I will share a story. Being Irish, I think many of you will know this, but before I came to Canada, I honestly don't think I made a goal in my life. Before that, life happened and opportunities arose, and I took them as they arose. And not to say that that's the best way to go about your life, but it does speak a little bit, I think, that people have different ways to get places. Some wish to be involved a great deal, others perhaps less so, and others still, it is a process of learning how to sit in the driver's seat. And so offering people the opportunity to sit in the driver's seat with support. I think that's an important aspect. Providing advance notice of planning meetings with reasonable control over the location and the time. And sometimes in a busy practice, that's hard to do, but worth doing. Providing opportunities for people receiving services to invite loved ones or others to these meetings and help people reflect on their progress, satisfaction, changes in needs. So earlier, in the chat box, we talked about just the dynamic nature of needs, so that we need to do ongoing assessment. It's not simply a one-time only intervention. And then providing those information and rights and responsibilities. So these are strategies that may help promote maximum participation and may provide some structure for us to be able to ensure that we are able to articulate that we are involving people in ways that may be helpful for them. So I'm just going to stop for a moment and just go to the chat and see if I have missed anything. Quality of care, acknowledging of the impact of mental illness and cognition, including planning and decision making. Sharon, that's a fantastic point that may speak to number 1 on this slide. Best practices 2, ensuring that people receiving services are involved as they desire. So it might mean that we're not involving them in sort of a formal written sense, but perhaps we're going for a walk with somebody, we're maybe visiting a particular facility that they may be interested in. So doing things in different ways that ensure participation. So thank you for that, Sharon. I appreciate that example. Thank you. Okay. So just my notes, I'm referring to them. It's about offering people as much choice over variables as possible, making sure that appointments do not interfere with other desired recovery activities, such as work. So it may be that somebody wishes to engage in work, but they also need to see you. So just juggling those competing sometimes challenges for people. Having peer support in the meeting to help the person prepare, or to help the person prepare for meetings and interventions can be helpful, and providing team members with all the documentation will help everybody carry out their responsibilities, meaning the client can also have a record of their plan, which shows the client what to expect from professionals and natural supports and what they too are committed to. Knowing these plans will be shared in advance is a powerful tool, and it may alter the language that sometimes we use within the plan. So there's just some notes that I captured from Pandora that I felt were helpful to this conversation. So let's look a little bit at natural supports and community inclusion. So natural supports, the object of involving people are really to help identify pathways to meaningful community life, and requires documentation of physical health, perhaps, employment, family relationships, education, spirituality, housing, and satisfaction with that housing, service participation, and obviously satisfaction with that, intervention as well, recreation, community service, and civic participation. So really looking at broad domains of people's life, and including that broader recovery vision. We'll talk a moment about the recovery declaration, but really here we're trying to identify a broad range of support and alternative strategies to support recovery that may include, alternatives to mental health practice or medication, but that just engage the person in that broader community. And I think with a focus on interdependence, seeking maximum participation in communities of choice, that the practitioner needs to be aware of community possibilities for recovery and potential barriers. Often, as may be the case, development of community resources for people receiving services may be part of the role of clinicians or practitioners. Consistent is the message of the expectation for growth and recovery. So 4th of 5 is considering the dignity of risk and the right to fail. And again, within the chat box, you've already captured these ideas, but really knowing that each person is considered competent to make active choices, and that only in situations of imminent risk or harm to self or others would professionals intervene, and even then it is required to involve the person receiving services as much as possible. It may involve also developing advanced directives or plans for possible times of crisis as well. What is essential in times of challenge is to be able to debrief with the person afterwards, to see it as a learning opportunity, a chance to develop self-awareness, and a stronger view of that person's values and needs for the person receiving services. So I know that we could have a full webinar on this, and perhaps someday we will, but I really appreciate that in the chat box we did understand that this is important within person-centered planning. So next is just a series of slides helping us to understand that these best practices are situated within documents that are part of that. The first of which you may be familiar with is the Recovery Declaration. At the bottom of this slide, you will see a web link. I'm sure you've seen it, but if you haven't, I really encourage you to have a look at it. And it starts this document on page 2 by recognizing that each person is a unique individual with the right to determine his or her own path towards mental health and well-being. So, of course, I think that captures very well person-centered planning. Enabling people, strategies are enabling people to define their own goals, master the tools they need to take responsibility for their own recovery, maximizing the opportunity for people to choose for themselves the most appropriate treatment, services, and support, working to create genuine partnerships between service providers and service users, families, and supporters that are based on respect for expertise gained through lived experience as well as professional expertise. Personally, I really like how that's written because I think it truly values both people within that relationship, the expertise of people within that relationship. And then respecting the dignity of risk and the balancing calculated risk-taking with legal obligations. So again, I think this captures beautifully the previous slides around person-centered care. So I hope we walk away with this sense of that it's nested within our documents of what the Mental Health Commission is saying is important. So as we advance practice in this area, I think it's good to know that these ideas are central to Canadians. Jason asks, getting away from the notion of mistake as wrong thinking. Cool. Absolutely. Just embracing that we all make choices and sometimes they're not right or we learn differently, and that not that they're wrong, but they're on that path for us learning. The service framework, which many of you may be aware, is hopefully coming by the end of the year, talks very much about assessing strength and resource needs. Again, the important aspects of the strength-based approach are the assessment of a person's strength, interests, and skills, as well as internal and external resources needed. It's also important to assess the available and required resources in the client's community and subsequently set goals jointly. So again, I'm just building the case that here we see it with the Mental Health Commission, we're going to see it in the Mental Health Framework, and also I just drew from this same document to situate this conversation, knowing that PSR values, PSR Canada, PSR approaches are collaborative, person-directed, and individualized. They assist individuals in rediscovering skills and assessing the community resources need to live successfully with a self-identified quality of life. And here I think this notion of a self-identified quality of life is key to truly involving people receiving services in their planning. Accordingly, PSR approaches involve the client setting goals rather than goals being set by others. So this may be a key difference with person-centered planning and interventions as usual. And finally, this is a document I just learned about yesterday, thanks to Chris LaForge, who may be online, talking about setting priorities. And this comes from the BC Ministry of Health, was published June, I believe, this year, February this year, and talks about person-centered care, very similar to person-centered planning, I think, but person-centered care will be the foundational driver in the planning and implementation of all strategic actions in the health system strategy. Key action is to shift the culture from being a provider, administrator, disease-centered to being person-centered. Strategies include individualizing the experience, using feedback from patients to drive the change, part of the governance of an organization, and part of evaluation of staff and executive performance reviews. So here we get a strong message from government. We need to be able to demonstrate that we are engaging people receiving services in their care. So I was struck by that when I read that yesterday, and I thought that that was really an important change or shift, I think. PSR approaches build on the assessed strength of a person rather than their deficits or problems. A major difference from traditional illness-based approaches with focus on problems and deficits. And here in the chat, I think you also mentioned that. I'm just checking in here. Chris says, hi there. Thanks for bringing this perspective in as well. Well, thanks for sharing that with us yesterday, Chris. So, yeah, so strong message. Person-centered planning or person-centered care are really important aspects. All right. So I'd just like to stop for a moment and see if anybody has any questions before we move to challenges. So just want to check in. I realize I've been talking for quite a few moments and just really want to stop and pause and see if anybody has questions or comments. So we'll spend a minute or so just reviewing the chat box to see if anybody has comments, feedback, thoughts. Slides will be available, Sandra, for sure. Yes, they'll be posted on the PsyRehab.ca website.
They're there right now.
Oh, Matthew tells me they're there right now. He's brilliant.
So the slides, for anyone who's interested in the slides are available at www.psyrehab.ca under the resources link. As well, this webinar will be posted in its entirety shortly following the session.
I really appreciate you wanting to share them, Shirley, with your colleagues, because that's what it's about, right? It's just hopefully having some information in one together in a little package that I'm sure you'll build on. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with colleagues. Should you come across any other resources that we haven't captured here, really like to hear from you too, Shirley. So let us know. As somebody mentioned, it really is we are beginning this journey. So thanks for that, Matt. So I'll just wait for another comment or two, and then we can. One of several books written by Carl Rogers, ClientCentered Therapy. Implications and Theory. It's a great resource, Kathy. I really like that book as well. Thank you. Thank you for posting it here. Perhaps we can put that too on the website, Matt. Thank you. It's curious how we find ourselves coming back to client-centered therapy. It's a curious reflection, an important one too. I see that multiple attendees are typing, so I'm just going to wait one more moment and then we'll move into challenges. We will have time for discussion at the end, so if I don't get to all your questions, I'll maybe just ask Matt, please, if you can maybe capture the essence of some of those questions. And if we don't get them now, we will attend to them at the end of the presentation. So Mary says, PCR is client and has the solution, not that the client has a problem. So the client has a solution. I love the essence of what you're saying, Mary. Absolutely. Yeah. Generally, we, I think, as practitioners, try to fix people, but your orientation toward the client having a solution is essential. Thank you for that. All right. Let's take one more question here. Kathy says, from a substance abuse perspective, we operate very much in this way. Great. Thus, I'm assuming the push for change is coming from other areas. It will be welcomed from our clients when coordinating care. Right. Well, I think we see that with the Mental Health Commission, who speak about recovery from mental health and substance abuse, I guess it really is that consistent message. I think also we really have to look at the literature that's telling us that perhaps in certain areas we're really not doing it well, and that we're falling down around the documentation aspect, Kathy. So your point's well taken. Work in substance abuse may be well ahead of perhaps traditional care. So I'm sure there's lots that we can learn. And challenging ourselves, I think, to ensure that people are as involved as possible is something is probably an ongoing point for all of us. Judy says, power to change motivational interviewing. Thank you for sharing the substance abuse. Land, Kathy, comes from Matthew. Kathy, documentation, right. So I think what Pandora et al. And others tell us that although we may have great conversations with people, often our documentation seems to sway more towards administrative needs as opposed to capturing in that person's language the interventions that they may wish to engage in. And also really, I'm not sure how customary it is to hand somebody a copy of their plan or to have them sign it, for example. So perhaps we have a little work to do around that. All right. So now I'm going to move, no, I'm not, at this, from Tracy says, how can we elicit a client's hopes, dreams, goals when they do not know themselves and are unwilling to engage in past activities that were once inspiring to themselves, talent, skills? Tracy, that is an amazing question, and I know it is an important question for practice. I know that it's also very, very challenging. One resource that I've used is, maybe Matthew can type for me, and if we don't have it, is something by Krupa et al. It's titled Action Over Inertia. Action Over Inertia. It's a 2010 publication and can be found at the Occupational Therapy website. So I like this tool because it really engages people in understanding what they do well and in understanding what changes they might want to make. I hope that's a useful tool. Tracy, you bring in a superb question that I think relates to readiness. And I think as PSR practitioners, developing readiness is something that we need to do a better job at articulating. I personally have found Terry Krupa's tool very helpful. So Darcel adds something so important, listening and baby steps, which I think the toolkit that I just mentioned really does involve baby steps. Developing trust, Susan, thank you. Readiness is key. Matthew, Action offers various templates that are very user-friendly. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. A name I recognize there, Matthew. Nice to see you. All right. So if it's okay, what I'd like to do is maybe just to move into some of the challenges, and in a way, I think we're beginning to talk about some of the challenges. And I just want to say that I truly respect that somebody who's at the beginning of their recovery, providing that kind of supportive listening and hopefully engaging context for people is so important, so important. Okay, so perhaps you want to just take a moment and tell me what you found might be some of the challenges of implementing PCP, because I know many of you do this work, and I have a slide prepared, but maybe there's some things that you'd like to share that I may not have. And I see Michael has some ideas, and Kathy has some ideas as well. So we'll just wait for that information to come in. All right. Biggest challenge is working with the confines of ministry program, for example, around employment services. Immediately, I want to hear more, Kathy. I really appreciate that. And I don't know if you have time to just maybe type a little bit more, maybe just around what are the specific contexts that you find very challenging. That would be helpful. Thanks, Michael, for giving the reference. I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. Marianne's competing priorities, community, client, family. Interesting. Mary, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that as well, because I think it's the nuances that sometimes get us. They're the big cultural issues that sometimes systems don't allow us to do some particular things. So sometimes it's hard to tease that out, isn't it? Big challenge is finding ways to motivate members. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit in a moment. Krista says access and flow pressure. So just busyness, it sounds like, and getting people access to services. And yeah, I hear you, Krista. Phoebe says frequent change of therapist and fragmented service delivery can be a big problem. Agreed. Matthew says working with clients to make the move from dependency creating system to one of active participation. Thank you, Stephen. Leo says planting seeds. What client's interest motivating to change? It must be the client who decides they have a good enough reason to alter their life. So there's got to be a reason, Leo. I absolutely agree with you. There's got to be a reason to change. Fear of success often as great as fear of failure. Expectations increase. Thank you, Cheryl. Shirley says helping create mirrors to reflect on and often unrecognized ways we as providers disempower language, procedures, physical environment. That's superb, Shirley. Thank you for that. Kathy says, I would add the demand of what clients have been requested or demanded to be doing for ministry. Number of appointments required, need for screening. Overall, it just feels too much. Right, so sometimes you feel that there are so many structures in place, you're trying to adhere to the structures rather than having time for that individual to decide what's important for them. Kim says, clients' fear of being the driver of their recovery and not being told what to do. Yeah, it's terrifying sometimes. I absolutely... Having been in that seat, sometimes you think, well, I don't know. So I appreciate that. And I think there's a lot of good work happening with peers that I think can really help with that experience, help to support that person in that place of stress. So thank you. I'm going to move away from this a little bit. Keep typing. We will maintain a record of this, Matt, will we? Because it will be really useful, I think, after the fact to just go through this information.
Wondering if you can you maybe make a comment, Regina, on how person-centered planning would address an issue that Stephen Harding brought. He was saying one of the challenges is diagnosis as a prerequisite to accessing services, and that's quite pervasive through our formal system. It doesn't seem intuitively that it would fit with the principles of person-centered planning. So can you make a comment on that one? Sorry.
So no, that's great. Thank you for that. So I guess the question is that for some people to receive services, they need to have a particular diagnosis, and only then can they access the service. So I guess it's a question of access. And, you know, I think persons planning, in some respects, it doesn't attend to the diagnosis piece, but it does attend to the intervention piece in terms of helping people receive services. So once you're in, you're good, assuming we're doing it well. So I'm not sure I'm so sorry, Stephen, I'm not sure I have a good answer to that. I think really you're pointing out an issue of access to service. And I think I need some more time to mull over that. I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry. Perhaps others on the chat do, but I do not at point. Because I agree with you, often within our service delivery, community mental health services and others, for somebody to receive services, they have to present with a particular diagnosis, and then they can receive services. So I'm going to just scan the chat and see if somebody has a better answer than I do. Incorporate for clients that are certified in voluntary as well as in community. Thank you, Natasha. I think that's absolutely possible, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Shirley says, Recovery Innovations of Phoenix has a lovely explanation that they review with clients, explaining that some diagnosis is helpful in their recovery, for others less so. But in order to meet the funding requirements, we need to address diagnosis, but let you know if this is something that you will want to focus on or not. So that's giving the choice that's giving the choice to the client, and I appreciate that, Shirley. And it sounds, I'm making an assumption that that person then is in a position that they can receive services, and perhaps I misunderstood Matthew's question, but my understanding is that it's sort of the diagnosis can prevent somebody actually accessing the intervention. Yeah, so I'm absolutely on the same page there, Shirley, with you. Phoebe just brings up barriers to family. Kathy says we've used situational ethics that I'd like to hear more about, and that sounds like a helpful tool. Kathy, if you have a reference that you can send us, we'd like to hear what you're actually using. Thank you. All right. So I apologize that I don't have a great answer to that, but I'm just going to identify some of the challenges that I had thought about as well. The first being the transfer to person-centered care values in a PSR competency. So how do we demonstrate that this is what we're doing? Influence action in a systematic and predictable way. So again, this assumes that the client is receiving services at this point. Some practitioners may consider that PCP is of little interest to people they serve, or that people are not ready for this. So this speaks to the earlier comment. In truth, doing PCP with people may seem at first dangerous, and it may seem that people are not interested or not ready. It may reflect of years of being disappointed and being demoralized with systems, and people not willing to trust these changes. So, okay, Regina offers me the opportunity to participate, but perhaps that's not ongoing. Perhaps it just happens within one service that I may receive. It may not happen in the broader system delivery. So, you know, people learning to trust that way of being within systems will take time, and opportunities to learn how to do it from both practitioner perspectives and also from people receiving services. So Tandara is just identifying that it can take time and that we need some time to transition there. The consumer survivor literature has argued that much of what providers view as apathy, passivity, or lack of motivation to engage in person-centered planning is actually due to learned helplessness, and that stems from years of having other people take control and assume decision-making, making authority over their lives. And again, that comes from Tandora et al. But I think it speaks to just the context. And no surprise, perhaps, PCP happens infrequently in practice. And again, that's not me saying that, but it sounds very much like it is happening in some situations, thanks to the chat box. Leo says, institutionalization is very frustrating for all parties involved. Motivation to take control of their lives is foreign to them. Right. So I think you're supporting that last comment. Just want to take a little moment to think about approaches reflected in language, and this is all, we've already identified this in the chat box. So language is, the language that's present in plan should not be stigmatizing and should not be objectifying, according to Tandora 2014. I guess thinking about what might be some examples of stigmatizing language and what are we avoiding, how do we help ourselves or each other to reach this goal. For some, I think just that illness, that diagnosis may be of secondary value to the individual, as mentioned already, but that the language that we use should be comprehensible to the individual, to the team, and to the natural supports. So when terminology is used, we should explain it to people receiving services, and goal statements related to meaningful life, not just to symptoms, and certainly within that person's language. So trying to avoid, you know, words like compliance might be a particular example. So we'll just leave that section for a moment. Treating individuals as person rather than label. Super beautiful. Individuality is the key. So let's just move to, okay, so we've talked about big picture values, everything else, situated it in the literature, understood some of the challenges or barriers. Let's think about what could it take to make PCP a reality, given that it may be a reality in some context. But the best approach seems to be on-site support to implement practice in daily routines. So for people delivering services, just to be within a community of practice that provides this support, to identify champions, to have a coaching option available for people who are interested, and incorporating feedback from people receiving services. So again, you saw within that Ministry of Health document and in the declaration, certainly that is a constant theme for service delivery. Best practices, beginning with a strength-based approach, helping people to maximize their participation in planning, including the natural supports, supporting dignity and risk, and ensured documentation demonstrates how the person was involved in the planning and the documentation. So next we're just going to move for a moment to a case study. So I'm going to make you work a little bit here. So Frank referred himself to a clubhouse where you are an employee. Frank is a 32-year-old plumber. He's a father of one 4-year-old son, divorced, and sees his ex-partner and child 2 times per week. Frank is precariously housed and in need of stable housing. He occasionally uses alcohol and/or heroin and has been given a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. He just got connected to the local mental health team and says, "I want to get a job." What steps would you take? I'm going to give you a hint here. You remember this second to last slide here. Begin with a strength-based assessment. I'm just going to ask you to think for a moment. How would you begin with Frank? So it's hard to hold both things in your head. Case study, we heard a little bit about Frank. We know he's 32, single. We know he has a son. We know he's divorced, precariously housed. We know he has a diagnosis. We know he has some mental health support. And really, he wants to get a job. So how would you begin to think about? What I'm trying to do here is action the ideas, think about the best practices, and think about how you would go about working with Frank. I'm just going to give you a moment to think about it. That's a very short moment, isn't it? But it's hard to do this on a webinar. But thinking about Frank, I guess the best practices are suggesting we begin with a strength-based assessment. So helping Frank identify his strengths and his barriers. We would then help Frank to identify and write his goal. We would help Frank to identify the objective in Frank's own words and articulate the specific intervention methods and action steps. And we would ensure that Frank has a copy of his plan. So here we would help Frank identify family support, employment skills, that he has support of a mental health team. We might help him consider some of the barriers that his illness, he now has a diagnosis, and it makes working consistently perhaps difficult, and that his housing is precarious. We might help Frank identify and write his goal. He says, "I want to get a job." That might be a goal right there. We might help Frank identify the objective in Frank's own words. Frank will apply for 4 jobs in the next 3 weeks, might be an objective. We then might help Frank articulate the specific intervention methods and action steps. Ashley, who's the employment specialist, will meet with Frank to help him develop a resume and apply for work. She's going to meet with him approximately 30 minutes for the next 2 months. Ted, who's his OT, is going to meet with Frank weekly for up to an hour to help him with the stresses of returning to work and with parenting. Paul, who's his peer support worker, is going to meet with him to help Frank become connected with the clubhouse housing program and with a group for dads. Frank's ex-wife will attend a monthly family group 2 times per week to help her find support and education regarding a mood disorder. And then we're going to ensure that Frank has a copy. So I appreciate that that's fast, but it's meant to think about what are our best practices at the moment and how would we begin to do the planning process. So thank you for all your comments. Start with a strength. You guys had it. You are on topic and you got it. First, ask him why he wants a job. I would assume he's really referring to it to a means to an end. Okay. So you're asking more questions. Fantastic. Many resolved. Yeah. Okay. So that's just meant to be a little bit of an easy, quick look at how do we begin to go about it. And I appreciate many of you probably do this already. So in the next minute or two, I'm just going to ask you to work again and to maybe just think about what have we talked about today and how might this information shape your practice. So, I'm very keen that often we go to an educational session and then it just kind of sits in our head. So I'm asking you to think about how might this information shape your practice, and maybe you're already doing most of it, maybe there's a small thing that you would take on for yourself. I would ask you, how might this information shape what you do in your daily practice? So I'm just going to monitor the chat for a moment or two, and then I'm going to open to questions. Kate's asking more about substance misuse. Absolutely, good plan. But you can see it was a fairly strength-based approach. But right now, I'm just going to move in to ask you, for this webinar, how will it change what you do, if at all? And it won't. I'm just going to make another minute or so. Okay, good, Sharon. Yep, thanks. You're absolutely right. Strength as an employee is not addressed. Fantastic. Yeah. So Lisa's saying, help the client with goal setting, celebrate strengths, offer more information to on other resources. That's awesome, Lisa. That's great. That's great. Sharon says, maybe not fit to work right now. Maybe not. Yeah, I hear you. So it's just, you're asking good questions. Within tertiary health, sometimes the chat goes so quickly I lose. Let me come back to Leo there. Oh, Lordy. Such a tiny little button here. I might start with, what does he like about being plumber? Does he want to do the same or something different? Right. Support quality of life, listen to encourage, has a trade which pays well, stigmatizing language. This case is calling the client an addict. Okay. So that's from the chat I missed earlier. We are already doing strength-based assessment, but I can see that more needs to be done, more focus on the assessment. Okay. Thanks, Leo, for that. That's good. I will allow the client to guide the creation of an action plan, Stacey. Fantastic. We'll start gathering more information during the strength assessment from the client conversation, Kathy. Nona says, I feel inspired. Thank you. Important to continue what we are doing right with PCP and use the resources more and acknowledge your strengths, Nona. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Inspirational to continue the PSR work, Jason says. We already do. Good. Give a visual for the client. Fantastic. Yeah.
And we had another question from a little ways back, but maybe from Kathy Millay, who was wondering if you had any other examples of stigmatizing language that might be good to avoid in this process as well.
One thing that I've come across again and again is just, I'll give you is language about diagnosis. So you are probably familiar that there's a lot of conversation around the SAMI population. That really troubles me, to be honest. So it stands for seriously mentally ill and addicted. So in that way, we have a label without actually acknowledging the person. So I think just using person-first language that I guess the WHO, the World Health Organization, really encourages to use. So a person with an illness, a person with a diagnosis perhaps, somebody who lives with. So just seeing the person before seeing the diagnosis. So that might be another example. I think often we say people are not, they're not following the rules or they're not taking their medication. So just, I try to use words like adherent. I try to really not use compliance in terms of medication use. Those might be two concrete examples of language. Thank you for that question. So Lisa says, JD says, sharing with interdisciplinary team and encouraging them to use strength-based. Good. This is meant to a group therapist. My work already is shaped by this philosophy. Fantastic. To add to it, I am also going to make sure the clients receive a copy of their letter sent to their doctors at the completion of the groups. Awesome. Matthew says, an easy first step is to ensure referral forms and marketing are conveying strength-based language. Fantastic. Fantastic, Matthew. That really is exciting. Jason says, Jason, I don't see. Encouraging, we'll never stop learning, always ideas, information, team building. I'm missing Jason.
So Jason Short has brought an idea forward that a few people are applauding. Quite a few people are applauding.
Right.
I'm impressed. Jason says that the term case manager is offensive and stigmatizing because people are not cases to be managed.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Just give a shout out to that one. Thank you.
I really appreciate Jason. Thank you for helping me. The chat box is very small and I don't see very well, so sometimes I'm not as swift as I should be. So thank you so much for the help. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, absolutely.
And frequent flyers.
Oh my word, that really makes me sad. Yeah, agreed. Thank you. We just gotta take that. Christine says, I hope the conversation challenges us all to identify our strengths and set goals to improve our practice to support more self-determination with people and with ourselves. I agree with you, Christine. I think we do many things well, and it's so important to acknowledge that. And some areas we need to advance, absolutely. Leah says, allow ourselves the time to spend with a client to really listen and reflect. Too often we rush our work. Clients are not ready or be able to move at the speed we would like in order to complete our own agendas. Beautifully said. Mary says, attention seeking, oh gosh, it's very impossible. Absolutely. When we really don't consider that that person has a need that's not been met. When somebody really needs a lot of support, it just indicates that what we're doing is not working. And we keep doing it, right? So, yes. Personality disorder, Stephen doesn't like. I guess it's a diagnosis. For some, I know some people who actually appreciate that diagnosis, but I think often we use it in a derogatory way, Stephen. So I concur with that. Shirley says, instead of compliance, the person choosing an option different from the one suggested by the provider. Beautiful. Terry says, in my work, we use PCP method already, but I learned here to remind to go at their pace and not ours. Too often we look at the client and say they are following through and they don't want to help themselves. Have to delete this attitude. Nice way to delete it. It's hard to delete it, so be gentle with ourselves, but we need to. It's just essential. And I think just really asking the question, okay, so the person is not moving as quickly as we want. Why? Asking why. What do I see? What's in the environment that helps me understand that perspective? Elsa says, mindful awareness of our commitment to provide a compassionate and effective pathways to wellness and recovery. Nothing else to say, Elsa. That's just pretty well amazing. Thank you. Beautiful. Great. So I think we might be very much at time. We can take one question perhaps, but I think we probably should. We can take one additional question. Is there anything I missed, Matt, from earlier that you noticed?
No, I think we caught up on most of the questions. My apologies if we did miss you. While folks are throwing in their last questions, I just wanted to draw attention one more time to our website, which of course is www.psyrehab.ca. That's the advanced practice foundational website. It's got our previous webinars up on it. It's got information about the upcoming service framework, other resources, links that are particularly poignant to the discussions that we've been having. The slides, yes, Joyce, the slides are available on the website at this time right now under resources page through the webinar 4 link. Additionally, we also we have a registrant option where you can join the website. And what that basically gets you is access to a discussion forum where you can be sharing some of these ideas. You can have discussions about practice, challenges that you may be encountering, success that you may be encountering, and also suggest additional resources in that page. We moderate the discussion forum, and we can take the suggestions for the resources off those pages and formally embed them into the website as well. Sandra, thank you very much for that feedback. We're very happy.
Great job. So thanks for your accolades. The truth is we get better when you give us feedback and you let us know what we can do better. So I really appreciate the positive support. Thank you. But do let us know how we can improve. Let us know if there are things that you want to hear about. Let us know if you want to do some presentations yourself. We can work on it together. For some, it might be a little bit scary, but we can work on it together. But if there are things that you really want to hear about, do please let us know. And again, so nice to see our friends and our graduates of PSR course and our OT graduates and others. Thank you. It's a really eclectic group present. I just want to let you know what we did, but you can read that for yourself. And then exercises for you. So there was a question, are the slides available? Yes, they are. They'll be on the website, as Matt mentioned. And hopefully you'll come and join us on the 24th at 10 again. Yeah, fantastic, Sandy. Great.
Yeah,
from Halifax. How about that? Wow.
Glad you got on,
cool.
Kathy.
That's really great. Cool. All right.
So just to let everybody know, as Regina's mentioning, our upcoming sessions, we have one more in July, which she did mention was July 24th, which is a strengths-based assessment session. And then we're going to take a short break for August, and when we come back, we're doing 3 more sessions in September, October, and November. We have in the works right now. So keep your eye out for those postings as they come around, and get registered if you're interested and available on those days. Also, just letting you folks know that an evaluation survey, as Regina mentioned, will be emailed to everybody who participated today shortly after the session. And that email will include a link to the evaluation survey itself, as well as information on how to click and download your certificate of participation and a blank template, participation template, if anybody was with you that didn't actually their own registration. So if you had other folks in the room with you, they get their credit as well.
And if you can let us know about other folks in the room, that really helps us. So what we're trying to do is just find creative ways to fund this this work. So the more we know about who's participating in this education, it just really helps us. So it just adds to our for support. So thank you. All right.
All right.
All right.
Talk to everybody again.
Happy summer. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.